In this example, we're going to build a simple drop-down web component. Here we have a drop-down that has a simple button, and when clicked, shows some dynamic content. For our drop-down, we'll be able to pass in a custom title for our button, as well as any dynamic HTML that we'd like the drop-down to render. Taking a look at our drop-down template, we can see we have a style tag. We style our div with a little bit of padding and a border that provides the drop-down box. Within our template, we have a simple button that we'll use to create a click handler to be able to toggle our content. In our template, we have a div with our slot that will dynamically project our content from our user. First, we need to set up the ability to pass in a custom title into our button. To update the button title, we need to set up the attributes and the properties for the title. First, we need to implement the observed attributes static property. This returns a list of attributes that we want our component to watch for updates for. Here, we're going to pass in just title, so our component knows it should be watching for title changes. To store the information of the title, we set up a get and set property that's going to store the value of title. We have a private property, this._title, and whenever we get the title, we'll return that value. Whenever we set the title, we'll set that private title that we've created, and then we're going to grab a reference to our button element and set the inner text of that button. That way, whenever the property or the attribute is updated, our button reflects those changes. To listen for attribute changes, we need to implement the attribute change callback. This will pass in 3 parameters: the attribute that changed, the previous value, and the new value. Here we do a simple check. If the attribute is equal to title, and the old value is different than the new value, then we know to update it. By setting the title property, we update the private _title, as well as update the inner text of our button. Now that we can dynamically update our button, we need to do a little bit of work to set up the click event to be able to show and hide our content for our dropdown. In our constructor, we can see our title defaults to dropdown, so if we do not provide any kind of button text or title, we'll just list dropdown as the button. We create a property called show that will simply track whether or not it should show or hide our dynamic content. We set up our shadow DOM and our template, and then we query our template to be able to get reference to our button and our div element to be able to toggle and show and hide our content. Here, we get a reference to the button in our template by using this.shadowroot.querySelector, and now we can query our template. Now that we have a reference to our button element, we can set that inner text to our default title and also reference it when we set the title via a property. On our button element, we're going to add a click listener, so add event listener, click, and then call the method this.toggle. Our toggle method will simply toggle the show property, so this.show will equal to the opposite of this.show. We then use a reference to our content element, which is the div element in our template. With that div element, we initially hide it by using some CSS to display none, and then when toggled, we can check if the component is ready to show. We'll set it to display block, else we set the div to display none. Now we can show and hide our dynamic content for our dropdown. Whenever we open or close our dropdown, we want to provide a custom event hook so users of our components can listen for when the dropdown was opened or closed. To do that, we can dispatch a custom event, dispatch event, new custom event show changed, and then pass back the information to the user. So here on the conventional detail property, we pass back whether or not the dropdown is showing. Now consumers of our components will be able to listen for when the user has opened or closed our dropdown. If we go to our index.js, we can query the DOM for our dropdown component, and then we can start interacting with our dropdown. because we set up the title property, we can set the title via JavaScript. So now we have custom title instead of using attributes. By implementing the attributes and the properties, we give the most flexibility for our users. They have the choice of using attributes in the HTML or using properties in the JavaScript. Note, if you use attributes in the HTML, you can only provide string values since we're in HTML. With JavaScript, we can pass any type of JavaScript value into the property. We also can now listen to our custom event listener that we set up. So we do dropdown.add event listener, listen to the custom event show change, and then we just simply log the event here. So if we click our dropdown, we can see our event logged out. And with custom events, we get all kinds of information about the custom element itself, as well as the value that we pass back. So on detail, we log out and we show whether or not the dropdown is visible. If we close the dropdown, we'll get a new event, and we'll see that detail is false. Because we used a setter and getter to update the button inner text, if we used a set timeout or some other asynchronous method of updating the title property, we will be able to see that update reflect to the button. So here I have a set timeout. After 3 seconds, we'll update the title to new custom title. So if I save our title here, after 3 seconds, we'll see that our button is updated.